Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Prime Factors, which is episode 10 of season 1 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll for Voyager is the episode Prime Factors. So Prime Factors is the episode in which Voyager encounters a very friendly race of aliens that want to offer them a vacation on a luxurious planet, and Janeway starts to fall in love with the head magistrate, but then Kim discovers that they have technology that could help them get a lot closer to Earth, 40,000 light years. That's more than half their journey. However, they refuse to share this technology with Voyager, and the more Janeway starts to negotiate for this technology, the more she becomes disenfranchised with the magistrate and learns that he only cares about his own selfish pleasure, and so eventually decides to leave. However, one of the other people on the planet offer the technology in exchange for the library of stories. However, this person is not going through official channels, so Janeway refuses to treat with him. However, some of the crew, including B'Elanna Torres and Tuvok, take it amongst themselves to trade with this guy behind Janeway's back, and Torres, when she gets the device, learns that it can only operate around the planet, so if Voyager leaves the planet, then they will no longer be able to use it and it'll be useless to them, so she tries to operate it and nearly destroys the ship before determining that the device was useless and could never be integrated into Starfleet technology. And of course, Janeway feels betrayed by Tuvok and B'Elanna going behind her back and reprimands them both and shows her utter disappointment in both of them, which they both deeply regret. So, I love this episode. This is one of my favorite Voyager episodes, and I think it's underrated. I think not most people would say, like, yeah, this episode is fine, it's okay, whatever. But watching this episode in particular really makes me feel how much I appreciate season 1. I know I talked on my channel a lot before about how season 1 is one of my favorite seasons of Voyager, but the reason why is not necessarily that it had better episodes or better acting or whatever, but it mainly had to do with the tone that the show had, which I feel continued in season 2. I know apparently a lot of people love the shit on season 2. Season 2 has some terrible episodes, but also has some great episodes. But it continues the tone that season 1 set, which is why I think it's better than some of the later seasons. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about season 2. I'm here to talk about Prime Factors, and this episode in particular, like, to me, the tone, the attitude that the characters have, the setting around it, what the show does, like, it does everything right that a lot of the later seasons lost. Like, I think the later seasons don't have this tone, and of course, the main reason is because the writing staff involved. Well, main reason is the showrunner, which is Michael Piller, who I think Michael Piller is what made 90s Star Trek great. He came around in season 3 of TNG, and he turned that show from a shit show into a great show. Now, granted, he's not the only one involved writing this collaborative process, but he was the leader in everything, and then he went over to Deep Space Nine. Granted, his first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine weren't the best thing ever, and the show didn't improve after he left, but he got the ball rolling, he set everything up, and got the situation started, and then went over to Voyager, where I feel like the quality of, like, the tone that set the storytelling, the way the characters interact, the way stories unfold, especially when I compare to most, and there are some great episodes in the later seasons, don't get me wrong, particularly season 4, which is my favorite season of Voyager, which was the Brennan Braga era, but overall I think, like, the tone, the quality of storytelling, the way that they set the show and everything, I can really see that Brennan Braga, even though he's written some really great episodes, and I don't like to put him down as a writer, but I do like to put him down as a showrunner because you really see how he couldn't really hold a candle to Michael Piller. And I think that's very apparent to me watching this particular episode. Now, why do I say that? Well, I say that for several reasons. First of all, and this is something I talk about a lot when I bring up season 1, is the community aspect of Voyager. This is something I feel that later seasons really lost, and because part of it is because they were leaning way too hard on the episodic format. Because for the most part, they had like Naomi who would pop up every once in a while, then they had the Borg kids who would pop up every once in a while, and but for the most part, most of the other side characters were one-offs. You see them in one episode and then whoosh, they'd vanish and disappear. Whereas in season 1, at least, and it's carried over to season 2, which had characters like Hogan and whatnot, they would have a continuity of characters, of a lot of the background side characters. Like Seska, she started off as someone just saying "I, sir," but then they slowly built her up more. And Carrie, and just this communal feel, just the way all the characters would interact with each other, it felt like they were living on a community, and they had this familiarity with them. That I really feel that the later seasons lost. And the other major important thing that this episode really hammers home to me is they don't rely on the threat of the week. They don't rely on these sneaky aliens who come up and try to phaser them or attack Voyager or try to steal something from them, or they may appear nice but then they end up like shooting them, or they falsely accuse one of the crew members of a crime they didn't commit. As all these crutches that I feel like lesser writers rely on, depend on. I think it's the greater writers who don't depend on those crutches, who actually can create drama and tension without having to have an outright hostile firefight or if someone arrested for a crime. Although there was the fucking Tom Paris one in season 1, but we'll not talk about that episode because that was the clear worst episode of season 1. But it's episodes like this and Eye of the Needle, because I also brought this up in Eye of the Needle because that's another episode that relied mostly on the character drama rather than the third of the week, that really hammer home that this kind of storytelling works better. Now, you can't have a mixture of both because there were some threats of the weeks throughout season 1 and 2. I mean, there were the Vidians and the Kazon, or at least they were reoccurring, though, so they weren't as bad as just a random forehead alien showing up for one episode, attacking Voyager and disappearing, which is a format that the later seasons relied on too much. And as I said, but you can have a mixture. Like, I'm sure there's some episodes through season 1 and 2 that had forehead alien of the week show up as well. And that's not a problem to come up and like attack Voyager and be the threat of the week. That's not a problem, but as long as you do it sparingly. As long as where I think the later seasons, particularly 7, and maybe 6 to some extent as well, relied way too much. My cat's having fun. Relied way too much on this crutch, where I think if you take a step back from that every once in a while to have more character focused or episodes like this one and Eye of the Needle, it makes for a better show. And frankly, I think it's a better writer who's able to pull off this kind of thing. Which, again, I'm not knocking Brennan Braga as a writer. I'm knocking him as a showrunner. I think he wrote some of my favorite episodes in TNG and some great episodes in Voyager, too. Like Year of Hell, he wrote that. It's my favorite Voyager episode. But he usually works combined with some other writers. I think when doing a showrunner, he's not character-focused enough. And I also partly can blame the studio, not just Braga, for pushing. I'm sure they pushed the threat of the week. We need more action, excitement, or whatever. And And so I think this is lost. This slow pace. Let's not constantly put the ship in danger every single episode. Let's not constantly have the aliens turn evil and start shooting people with favors. Let's actually focus. Let's have some slow paced, character focused drama that doesn't necessarily involve the aliens being evil and shooting people. And this is the kind of thing I think when the later seasons try this, they give us crap like Fairhaven, but no, that's another topic altogether. Anyway. So I think just the quality of writing and the quality of the construction of the characters, the stories, the situation, the world that we're presented with was actually done much better in seasons 1 and 2. And I stand by that. I think it is Michael Piller because he was the showrunner for the first 2 seasons. And I think that was lost. Something was really lost, which was most apparent in season 3, which was terrible. But something was lost when he was pushed out of the show, which I think was the biggest mistake the show ever made. I can only imagine, as good as the later seasons are, I can imagine just how much better they could have been if they kept Michael Piller around. But oh well. So, and that's what I'm struck when I watched this episode, because this episode we're presented with an alien race that comes by and says, "I want to give you pleasure," and they're generally like, they're genuine. Like, they're friendly aliens. They don't want to destroy the ship. They don't have an ulterior motive. Although you could say that they do, but I'll get to that later. The ulterior motive is not to, like, steal the ship or, like, just kill one of the crew or take them captive or steal their shit and anything like that. That's what I mean by ulterior motive. I mean, it turns out the ulterior motive is because they're just being selfish because they like meeting new aliens, but that's fine. Like, that's not the stereotypical I'm going to shoot you and take your ship. So they don't have that kind of ulterior motive, which is I think that's great. I think that's great that they took that example. Also, like, they could have made this like a silly dumb episode like some of the Ryza episodes or whatnot that deal with vacations and stuff, but instead they actually used it to explore the interactions of the crew more, and they did have a threat of the week, or I wouldn't know. They didn't. Let me take that back. They didn't have a threat of the week, which is why I love this episode. But they had a drama situation. They had a dramatic situation. They had a conundrum, a dilemma that they had to deal with, and it was so natural. And the fact that the dilemma that created the drama of this episode wasn't we're under attack by these strange forehead aliens, that it was more had to do with interpersonal conflict among the crew. Like, that's the kind of storytelling that they should have done more of. This is the kind of expert storytelling that Voyager lost and was missing in its later seasons, if you ask me. Now, the episode begins with a scene with Harry Kim and Tom Paris and B'Elanna and Seska having lunch, and they're talking about how Harry Kim went out on his date and it fell apart because he fell off the gondola or whatever when they're in the holodeck. And I love that scene. And yeah, it's funny. I just watched a review that trashed the scene and said that there was gobbledygook and that's not how people talk. I think that person's utterly wrong. I'm sorry. I love this scene. It felt, this is the kind of like community building. This is the kind of it just created the atmosphere that this is a family. And then Janeway was off on the side and she noted, like, my crew is, starting to relate to one another. And it also dealt with the Maquis sort of merging into Voyager, which is something I think, especially the earlier episodes, especially the first episode of Voyager, mishandled because they integrated them way too quickly, where the process should have actually taken longer. But then you get other episodes like this one that do look on it as a process. Like, look, the Maquis crew and the my crew are starting to merge. They're starting to get it wrong. They're socializing with each other. They're not looking at each other as separate, different individuals. We're all identifying as one crew. And that was awesome. Like, I love that exploration of the Voyager as a community, as it's because they're alone. I think even more so than any other show like Next Gen, or even the first, not the first, but even like Star Trek Enterprise, because that was the first ship out. But even more so than those shows, it feels like this ship is more of a self-contained community because they're completely alone. Utterly alone, like even more so than the Enterprise NX-01, even though I know they were kind of out there and alone, but they still had Vulcans to fall back on, and they could always go call Admiral Forrest and Earth, where here, like, they can't call anyone. They're completely alone, so they can only depend on each other. And this is the element that I think the first 2 seasons understood, and I don't think the later seasons understood. Like, really, the later seasons should have and could have simply been taking place in the Alpha Quadrant, because they didn't actually, make it feel like they were trapped and alone. I mean, every once in a while they bring up the fact, oh, we want to get home. They bring in weird 4 aliens. It's like, oh, rather than aliens we already know, but that doesn't really give that feel of being trapped and alone and only having the crew to depend on each other. So I really think they should have just sent Voyager. They might as well just send Voyager home for the Alpha Quadrant, because they didn't utilize the storytelling. But anyway, enough about later seasons. Let me get more into this episode. So they meet the guy who says, "I want to give you pleasure." Now it's funny because in a different video I did, I think the one I did with my sister about the first couple seasons of Voyager, and I talked about this episode, I referred to the actor as Italian. And then I read something from Michael Piller, who said, we shouldn't have cast a French actor. And I was like, oh my God, he's French? But apparently neither. He's Dutch, apparently. But the reason why I thought he was Italian is because he played an Italian character on the show Lost. So as soon as I saw that actor on Lost, I was like, hey, it's the Pleasure Planet guy. But apparently, even though he's playing an Italian character, he's actually Dutch, but European. Like, he's very stereotypical European. And Michael Pill even talked about how he regretted casting someone who's so very obviously European in this role, because it kind of throws off the, makes it seem a bit weird that and I kind of mock it as well, that an alien, the Alpha Quadrant, not Alpha Quadrant, Delta Quadrant is simply European. But, why would an American be in the Delta Quadrant either? So you kind of can't win either way unless you invent your own accent, in which case it's just being silly, like Troy. Anyway, So that's ultimately fine. I just like to mock it a bit, I guess. But no, I did like this character. I like the actor a lot. I disagree with Michael Piller, who says that he he shouldn't have cast the actor. The actor's miscast, because he only said that because of the accent. But I think the actor actually is a good actor, and he worked really well portraying that type of character who comes off as extremely friendly. You could buy Janeway getting a bit smitten with him, and then they might have this little romance. You notice, well, they don't actually form a romance, so they're pretty much flirting with each other the only time, though, unless they do something off screen, which is possible, I suppose. But the only time they're about to kiss is stupid Harry Kim comes and interrupts them. But I personally believe that there was no hanky-panky off screen. I think their only interactions is what we saw on the episode, but that's just my sort of headcanon, because I think that they were kind of just flirting with each other most of the time, and when they were about to get it on, Harry Kim interrupted, and then later on the whole fact that the guy was being a dick about sharing the technology technology is what got in the way of Janeway getting her. In fact, I do like the scene towards the end of the episode when he is, trying to be all smitten with her and like starts kissing her hand, but then she brings up the fact like, oh, so yeah, you don't even consider sharing his technology, and he starts to get pissy with her. So I think that does illustrate that they never really went all the way. But I think the actor does a great job of playing a character like that who could come off as really inviting and friendly, and then later you learn he has ulterior motives and he's just a selfish prick. I think he does a really good job of selling that and not making you feel contrived, not making you feel like, oh, all of a sudden this really friendly guy, all of a sudden he's a prick. No, you actually buy it because there was that thing underneath him the whole time, is you just see who he truly is later, and the actor does a great job of showing this, in my opinion. And for that matter, we also get Harry Kim with his little romance, and Garrett Wong even mentioned that he liked this episode because of that, because Harry Kim actually gets, and I do like that too. That I think it worked better than let's not talk about this stupid later season episodes like The Disease. I said I would stop talking about the later seasons and how they're not as good as this episode. But anyway, but yeah, and it was interesting too because she's quite attractive, and you buy that she starts to get smitten with Kim because she's a scientist too, and when he starts talking about all these nerdish shit that actually appeals to her, and she takes him to this planet Alestria, and I like that scene. I think it works a lot. It is fun. I do kind of make fun of the fact that Kim actually could have gotten some, but he gets too distracted by the aspect of getting home that he completely blows it. But I kind of like it, and it makes sense for his character because we do know how obsessed Kim is with getting home, and we know that he actually has a girlfriend at home, so he feels a bit weird about doing stuff with other women in the Delta Quadrant, where Tom Paris, even though he keeps trying to convince him what happens in the Delta Quadrant stays in the Delta Quadrant, but Kim is too sort of proper to sort of go along with that, and so this all makes sense for his character, and it really works. And so overall, I think this worked beautifully. Now, let me take a moment to talk about the story idea for this episode, because it was originally pitched by trying to bring up his name, David R. George III, and there was another person with him, so it wasn't just him, but his name I recognize because he apparently, after he pitched this episode, he came on to become a novelist. He wrote a lot of Star Trek novels. Now, he wrote a couple novels for the Deep Space Nine series that took place after the show ended, and I really liked that series until it jumped the shark when they brought in different writers. But I liked it at first, and he wrote a couple books for that, and also he wrote some other books. But honestly, I didn't like his books, his writings, mainly because of his writing style. I found it really hard to follow. He just got too distracted with way too many details, and I just hated his writing style. But his story ideas were fine. I just didn't like his writing style. But anyway, this idea that he had originally pitched to Voyager for this episode involved Voyager encountering the species that sort of was the home to Gary 7. If you remember from the original series, micropilot piece of crap episode, Simon Earth, where Gary 7 was like brought on by aliens or whatever. So we would meet the aliens that sort of raised him, and they had the technology to send Voyager home, and they refused to share it with them. And the Voyager writers, or Michael Piller, very wisely decided to ditched the whole Gary 7 idea because they thought they didn't want to be tied too closely to the original series. Me personally, I don't see any problem with Voyager being tied closely to the original series. I do see a problem with them being tied closely to that episode, Assignment Earth, because that episode was crap. So I totally agree with their decision to 86 as storyline, so they said, get rid of the Gary 7 element to it, and so David R. George the third and his partner went back and they came back with a different idea that more closely resembled this one, because they 86 the whole Gary 7 thing, and they it worked. The Voyager writers bought it and made it into this episode. Of course, they didn't have any involvement in the actual writing process. That was trying to bring up who exactly wrote this episode. I know I had it before, but anyway, it was written by the normal Voyager writing staff. They just bought the idea from them, and apparently. It's credited for Michael Perricone and Greg Elliott, whose names I don't recognize, so I don't know what else they worked on. But anyway, the idea of this alien race, the Skarians, I believe they're called. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I don't particularly care. They were originally supposed to be a recurring main adversary, main villain, like the Vidians or the Kazon, and I had just found that out when I was yesterday when I was doing my research for this episode. And when I heard that, I was like, what? That's a stupid idea. Why would they do that? But in all fairness, that was the original concept of this episode. The original concept of the aliens, this would be a recurring alien race. When Michael Piller actually saw the finished product of the episode, he was like, no, they don't work as an alien race, so let's not bring them back. They don't work as a main adversary, which he's absolutely correct. They do not. So you could say it's just the concept of this alien race could have been a reoccurring villain, but how they were actually portrayed in this episode, they clearly could not. They would not be an interesting reoccurring. And as much as I like to harp on Voyager and other shows for having episodic episodes where it's just the alien of the week, I honestly think these aliens work best as a one-off. You don't need to see them again. I think seeing them again would just make it worse. So I think that was the right call. However, when I look at it, I think even looking at these aliens as an abstract concept and trying to forget how they actually were portrayed in this episode, just the concept was to have an aliens who are all about pleasure, and then they end up being adversaries and villains because they're just so obsessed with their own pleasure. They end up being destructive towards other races because they just care about their own pleasure. The more I think about it, the more I hate that idea, even in the abstract sense, because I think that that becomes the cliche of, oh, we're friendly aliens here to give you pleasure, and we're just evil, ha ha ha, dun dun dun, try to take over your ship, which is exactly, as I mentioned earlier, is exactly why I like this episode, because they don't do that. So basically, Michael Piller's original concept is he wanted them to be that cliche of the friendly alien who turns out to actually want to kill you, which is a dumb cliche, and I'm glad that they avoided that. So I actually think what they did in this episode with these aliens worked way better than their original concept of having them an adversarial, long-term, recurring villain. So I think this was the better thing to do, and I think what they got in this episode was much better than that other idea, which I don't think would have worked personally. So I do love how this episode starts off. I think the structure of it is beautiful, honestly, because I love how it is about the characters. It is about them just relaxing, going on vacation, and the crew interaction, and then it's sort of really seamlessly and beautifully just moves into being a story about the interpersonal conflict between the crew. When the concept of the device that could help them get home comes up, in the moral dilemma of well, the magistrate doesn't want to share this technology, and so they have to be a Starfleet crew and operate through official channels. And so that's why I love this episode so much, because it didn't seem jarring like a Simpsons episode or whatever, where it seems like they're two separate halves. They felt really related, and I thought flowed beautifully with one another. But it really did change the focus of the episode. But I think they did it in a seamless way, and I think for the better, because first of all, it made it more. It didn't have like a sort of. It created tension. I wouldn't say a threat, but it created tension on a natural level. And again, it explored Voyager as a community, but it explored the different facets that might arise when there's a major disagreement like this. And so having the scenes with, first starts off with B'Elanna and Seska talking. Now, Seska, of course, this is before she was revealed to be a Cardassian, although she will be revealed to be a Cardassian in the very next episode. So I feel, and I don't know this for certain, but I feel like they knew this when they were writing this episode, or at the very least when they were filming the episode. They knew that Seska was going to be revealed to be a Cardassian spy. So I think the actress purposely portrayed her in that, and I think we always seen Seska as someone mischievous and like the having bad advice and stuff in her few previous appearances of this, but in this episode particularly, I think this is the first time we really see her trying to be manipulative, and she really tries to manipulate B'Elanna to betray Janeway and to try to get the device on her own. So I really feel like they knew that she was a Cardassian at this point, and they were like setting up for her being this really manipulative villain. But I love how it starts with B'Elanna and Seska, and then what's his face, Joe Carey overhears what they're saying. They think, oh no, Joe Carey is, but he's like, no, I'm totally with you on this. I have a family I want to get back to. I'd really, we really need to get home, so I'm going to help you do that in any way possible. So I love that sort of meshing, coming together of people you like, that the two, former Maquis members and the Starfleet members, and of course B'Elanna and Carey had their whole disagreements in the past. They tried to bury the hatchet, but here you fully see him. It's like, no, I'm totally with you. I don't care about any past disputes that we have. Like, this is too important. I'm going to help you. And that was nice. And then, so to see them trying to, well, first, because they first say this before the other guy makes the offer to Harry Kim to, to give him the device in exchange of the stories, but on the download, not their official channels. And it's funny when Harry Kim brings this up, and he goes to the Captain Janeway about it and tells B'Elanna and Tom. Again, it's another scene I really love. I love this sort of, just socializing in the mess hall. We don't need some stupid holodeck program, but anyway, socializing in the mess hall and just talking about this casually amongst friends. But then B'Elanna gets the impression that that's not going to turn out well, that Janeway is not going to accept this guy's offer. And of course, she's absolutely correct. She knows Janeway well enough. And then that's when Seska starts being manipulative and starts scheming to, hey, we should just get it ourselves. And so eventually, the three of them, Joe Carey, B'Elanna, and Seska, do, work to try to make the exchange with this guy on the down low. But But, and I love this scene. I think this scene's absolutely amazing. When they go to do it, they find they're locked out of the transporter, and they can't get down there. And then Tuvok comes in, and you're like, "Oh shit, they're really fucked now. They were really caught." And they had that reaction too, like, "Oh my god!" Like, I think this. I love the way that this whole scene is acted, like that is portrayed, like, because they did a really good job of really showing that sense of, oh no, we're screwed now. Like, we totally got caught with our hand in the cookie jar. We're completely fucked. Tuvok is going to come down on us like a ton of bricks. And all of a sudden he's like, I noticed that when I tried to download the library that someone had already done it. I will go down and make the exchange. I love that. Such a great moment, and the look of shock on their face were like, you? Like, because they totally expected, like, to play by the book, by the rules, Vulcan to be the last person who would defy Janeway, who would go behind her back like this. And I loved it, personally. I thought it was absolutely great, and I think it made a lot of sense why Tuvok would do it, and especially the way he portrays it later in the episode. And so he goes down and he makes his exchange, and you notice when he comes back, when he gives the device to B'Elanna, he says, "Don't activate it yet until I've had a chance to talk with Janeway." So that makes all the sense. Maybe he should have actually held on to it and hid it somewhere instead of giving it to B'Elanna. But nah, it actually probably makes more sense to give it to B'Elanna. But it's just like, hold off on using this until I talk to Janeway. So it makes even more sense that he didn't intend to necessarily just try to use it behind her back like that. He wanted to talk to her first, but he knew that, so he was going to tell her what he did. He wasn't going to hide this from her, but he just simply made this exchange behind her back. But the wrinkle comes in when Seska and B'Elanna are studying the device, and they find out that it needs that planet's core to work. So as soon as they leave the planet, which they're about to do, they can't use the device anymore. Now, I heard it suggested that B'Elanna could have just simply came up with an excuse to keep them in the planet longer, like, oh, the impulse engines are failing or some bullshit, which I guess, but I mean, that would only keep them there so much longer, and Janeway would start to become suspicious. So they would still need to use the device, like, right away, essentially. So I don't know. I think it's fine. So she tries to use the device, but it almost destroys the ship, and then she realizes that it's just won't work with Starfleet technology. Like, there's no way it was ever going to work. So then they're found out, and we had the scene where Janeway reams out B'Elanna and Tuvok. Now, the thing about all this is that, because, and I love that, because Tuvok did not intend to betray Janeway the way that they did, because he didn't intend for this device to be operated like behind her back. He wanted to talk to her about it first, and he wanted them to work as a team to use the device. I guess his argument would have been to her that, look, I know I went behind your back, I know I didn't get through official channels, but hey, we have this device now, why not use it safely, and study it more. But then, of course, B'Elanna's whole reaction, we went through all this trouble to get this device, and if we leave this planet, we won't be able to use it. I mean, I don't know why they couldn't simply go back to the planet, but I suppose they kind of burned their diplomatic ties with the pleasure guy. So, he does say the word pleasure a lot, but anyway, so it makes sense on B'Elanna's part why she would operate the device, even though she probably shouldn't have, and why the ship almost getting destroyed is kind of the threat. But the bigger threat is that that was just one scene. The bigger threat of the episode as a whole is the splintering of the crew, and how this created a rift. And that scene where Janeway reams B'Elanna and Tuvok was absolutely amazing. Now, apparently, so the scene with B'Elanna, that showed, because Janeway showed a lot of trust in B'Elanna by promoting her to chief engineer, and so this felt like a betrayal of that trust. So she like makes it clear, like, if you do anything like this ever again, you're not going to be a member of this crew anymore. And that was such, and you could feel her like hurt, her disappointment, her emotion. It was like, you will no longer be a member of this crew. Like the way Kate McGrew played that, absolutely outstanding, amazing acting. You felt the emotional weight behind it, and just made that scene like just so much more powerful. But then there was the way she handled Tuvok was very different, though. She went at it from more of the perspective of, I feel betrayed, I feel disappointed, not angry, not how dare you do this to me, and not what the fuck is wrong with you, but more of, how could you do this to me? I'm so disappointed, I'm so betrayed. I feel like, how can I even function as a crew now, knowing that I can't trust you? And that was a really tender moment. That was a really nice spin to that. And apparently, this was Tim Russ's suggestion, because Tim Russ was very much against this episode idea of Tuvok betraying Janeway in this way. He didn't want it to happen. Now, I disagree with him there. I think that it does make sense why Tuvok would do this, and his logic is that because she couldn't do it for official channels, but he knew that she wanted to get home, so he was trying to spare her or whatever, and I think that made perfect sense. And so I actually disagree with Tim Russ that Tuvok wouldn't do this. I think he wouldn't. I think it's way more interesting that he did. But I do agree with him changing this scene, because originally this scene was supposed to be more, of a reprimand, kind of like the way she treated B'Elanna, more of how I'm going to punish you, how dare you do this to me. But it was Tim Russ's suggestion that they make it more of a quiet conversation of, like, I trust you, and more, I feel betrayed by this. And I think that was definitely the better way to go. I totally agree. And apparently, like, Tim Russ like really worked with them, with the writers and the director on this a lot, and they sort of changed the scene a bit because of that. And I think that really does show how invested, involved, and dedicated that he was to making sure Tuvok was portrayed correctly and consistently. And also, but more than that, though, it made more sense for Janeway's character to portray him that way. And overall, I do much prefer the way Janeway was portrayed in the first couple seasons to the later seasons. Later seasons, different writers had different ideas on who Janeway was, so it was very inconsistent. But in the earlier seasons, I think she was consistently shown as someone who actually genuinely cares about her crew and cares about their well-being, but also has to put her foot down and be the authoritative figure when she needs to be. And I think the writers really walked that line between her quite well, and you see that really, in this episode, how she really genuinely cares about her crew and she cares about their well-being. But to have them go off and behind her back like this was absolutely unacceptable. So I just think they did a great job of that overall, and I think it was a very powerful episode, and I really think it worked. So my rating for Prime Factors out of 10, I'm gonna give this a 10, the best. I think this is a criminally underrated episode. I think it's way better than people give it credit for. I think it has just the way that they treat visiting aliens, and is more complex and more adult than simply having them, I'm going to shoot you or whatever, or take your cow hostage. It's difficult writing. Like, they don't rely on crutches. And to be fair, as I said, the original idea was a bit of a crutch, because originally they were supposed to do that, but it evolved into something more complex and something better, and something that really delved into the community of Voyager and the interrelationships between the characters, which is much more fascinating to me. And the way that they betrayed the characters, I felt, was sort of more consistent, more convincing as people who are trapped in the Dark Quadrant than anything they did in the later seasons. But that's just me. Anyway, that is it for my review of Prime Factors. Be sure to check out my channel for many more Star Trek reviews and also reviews on other shows like Lower Decks, The Expanse, Better Call Saul, and Star Wars Clone Wars. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.